Long before the Inca built their stone cities in the clouds, long before Machu Picchu became a symbol of ancient South America, entire civilizations had already risen, flourished, and disappeared. They left no written language. They left no grand empires that survived into history books. But they left cities, older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than Stonehenge, older than anything most people associate with the Americas. For centuries, South America was described as a land of late development, a continent waiting to be civilized, a place where complex societies appeared suddenly, almost magically, with the Inca. That story is wrong. Archaeology has revealed a much deeper past, buried beneath deserts, jungles, and coastlines. A past where cities were built thousands of years before the Inca ever existed, where organized societies mastered agriculture, engineering, astronomy, and long-distance trade without metal tools, without wheels, and without written records. One of the oldest of these forgotten civilizations emerged on the dry coast of modern-day Peru, in a place that looks almost impossible for human settlement. This civilization is known today as Corral Supe, or Norte Chico. It began around 3000 BCE. At the same time the pyramids were rising in Egypt, people in South America were already building large ceremonial centers, massive platform mounds, and planned urban spaces. Corral, the heart of this civilization, was not a village. It was a city, complete with public plazas, residential zones, and monumental architecture. And it was built without pottery, without metal, without known weapons of war. Even more unsettling is what archaeologists did not find. No city walls, no evidence of large-scale violence, no mass graves from conquest. This civilization appears to have grown through cooperation rather than domination. Its power was not military. It was economic and cultural. Corral Supe thrived by controlling trade networks between the coast and the highlands. Cotton grown in the desert was traded for fish from the ocean and crops from inland valleys. These networks stretched hundreds of miles, binding communities together long before empires existed. Music played a role in this society. Archaeologists uncovered flutes made from pelican bones, tuned to specific notes. Ceremonial gatherings likely reinforced social cohesion rather than hierarchy. Power may have been spiritual rather than political. And then, after more than 1,000 years of stability, Corral Supe declined. There is no evidence of invasion, no sign of catastrophic destruction. Climate shifts, prolonged droughts, and environmental stress appear to have slowly undermined the system. People did not vanish. They moved. They adapted. They carried knowledge with them into new cultures. Corral Supe was not the end. It was the beginning. Across South America, new civilizations emerged, each building on what came before. In the Andean highlands, the Chavin culture rose around 900 BCE, creating religious centers that drew pilgrims from across the region. Their art depicted powerful, otherworldly beings, symbols of a shared belief system that unified distant communities. Chavin influence spread not through armies, but through ideas. Architecture, iconography, and ritual practices connected valleys and mountains into a cultural network that would shape the Andes for centuries. Later came the Moche, masters of irrigation and engineering. They turned arid valleys into fertile farmland using complex canal systems. Their cities featured massive adobe pyramids, vibrant murals, and a highly stratified society. Unlike Corral Supe, the Moche left clear evidence of ritual violence and sacrifice, revealing a different path to social control. Still later, the Nazca etched enormous designs into the desert floor, lines and figures so large they can only be fully seen from the sky. Their purpose remains debated, but they speak to sophisticated planning, geometry, and ritual knowledge. Civilizations rose and fell across South America for thousands of years. The Inca did not invent complexity here. They inherited it. By the time the Inca began expanding in the 1400s, they were building on foundations laid by countless societies before them. Roads followed ancient routes. Agricultural terraces refined older systems. Religious symbols echoed earlier beliefs. The Inca were remarkable, but they were not the beginning. They were the culmination. And that is what makes the lost civilizations of South America so important. They challenge the idea that history moves in simple lines. They reveal a continent shaped by deep time, experimentation, and adaptation. They show that civilization can rise without writing, without metal, and without conquest. Most of these cities were never lost in a dramatic sense. They were forgotten. Forgotten because jungles grow quickly. Forgotten because deserts bury quietly. Forgotten because history favored stone and text over earth and memory. But the land remembers. Every excavation uncovers another city older than the Inca. Another society erased not by failure, but by time. And the deeper archaeologists dig, the clearer it becomes. South America was never empty. It was never waiting. It was already ancient. As archaeologists pushed deeper into the Andean past, a pattern began to emerge, one that directly contradicted the idea of linear progress. South American civilizations did not simply replace one another. They overlapped, interacted, borrowed, and transformed. Knowledge did not disappear when a culture declined. It migrated. In the high-altitude plains near Lake Titicaca, another powerful civilization rose centuries before the Inca, Tiwanaku. This society flourished at an elevation where modern agriculture struggles to survive. Yet Tiwanaku developed one of the most productive farming systems ever created in the ancient world. They engineered raised fields called waru-waru, elevated platforms surrounded by water channels. These channels regulated temperature, preventing crops from freezing at night and drying out during the day. Even today, experimental reconstructions show these systems outperform modern farming in the same environment. Tiwanaku City was monumental. Stone blocks weighing dozens of tons were cut with extreme precision and transported across long distances, without metal tools or wheels. Some stones fit together so tightly that a blade cannot pass between them. The knowledge required to achieve this was not accidental. It was refined over generations. And then Tiwanaku declined. Again, no evidence of conquest, no burned cities, no invading armies. Climate data suggests prolonged drought disrupted agriculture. The system that once thrived under stable conditions could not adapt quickly enough. The population dispersed. The city was abandoned. But the knowledge did not vanish. It flowed into later Andean cultures, including the Inca. Further north, along Peru's northern coast, the Moche civilization demonstrated a different kind of mastery. Living in one of the driest regions on Earth, they built vast irrigation networks that redirected rivers across deserts. These canals sustained dense populations and surplus agriculture. The Moche also left behind some of the most detailed visual records of any ancient American civilization. Their ceramic vessels depict daily life, rituals, warfare, disease, and sacrifice with remarkable realism. These images suggest a society deeply aware of power, hierarchy, and the fragility of life. Unlike Corral Supe or Tiwanaku, the Moche embraced ritual violence as a tool of social control. Elite burials reveal elaborate regalia, gold ornaments, and evidence of sacrificial ceremonies tied to climate events such as El Niño floods. Here, environmental instability did not weaken authority. it intensified it. But even the Moche could not escape the limits of nature. Repeated floods followed by droughts strained their irrigation systems. Political fragmentation followed environmental stress. Cities were abandoned one by one. In the southern Andes, the Nazca created something entirely different. Instead of monumental cities, they reshaped the landscape itself. The Nazca lines, enormous geometric shapes, animals and symbols etched into the desert floor, required careful planning, precise geometry, and coordinated labor. These designs were not random. Many align with water sources, ceremonial paths, and astronomical events. In one of the driest places on Earth, water was sacred. Ritual, landscape, and survival were inseparable. Nazca engineers also built underground aqueducts called puquios, spiral access points leading to flowing groundwater. Some of these systems still function today, over 1,000 years later, and yet the Nazca too declined. Environmental degradation, deforestation, and shifting climate patterns likely undermined the fragile balance they depended on. Ritual could not replace rainfall. Geometry could not stop drought. Across South America, this story repeats. Civilizations rose by mastering their environments. They flourished through adaptation. They declined when conditions shifted faster than systems could adjust. None of these societies failed because they were primitive. They failed because they were complex. What is most striking is how much these civilizations achieved without technologies considered essential elsewhere. No iron, no written language, no draft animals. And yet, they built cities, managed ecosystems, and sustained millions of people for centuries. The Inca inherited a continent shaped by deep experimentation. Their road systems followed ancient trade routes. Their terraces refined earlier agricultural knowledge. Their religious symbols echoed beliefs thousands of years old. The Inca Empire expanded rapidly not because it invented civilization in South America, but because it absorbed and standardized what already existed. When Europeans arrived, they encountered the last layer of a much older story and mistook it for the beginning. The real tragedy is not that these civilizations disappeared. It is that their depth was ignored. South America was not a blank slate awaiting discovery. It was a palimpsest, layers of human achievement written, erased, and rewritten across thousands of years. And as modern technology uncovers more buried cities beneath jungles and deserts, one truth becomes impossible to deny. The Americas were ancient long before they were colonized, and the cities older than the Inca were not anomalies. They were the foundation. As research expanded beyond the Andes and coastal valleys, archaeologists began to realize that South America's forgotten civilizations were not confined to deserts and mountains. The greatest surprise came from a place long believed to be inhospitable to complex society, the Amazon rainforest. For most of the 20th century, the Amazon was described as a pristine wilderness, untouched by large-scale human activity. Indigenous people were assumed to have lived only in small, nomadic groups, constantly moving to survive poor soils and dense vegetation. That assumption was wrong. Beneath the forest canopy, hidden by centuries of regrowth, lay the traces of vast engineered landscapes. Using satellite imagery and LiDAR technology, researchers uncovered geometric earthworks, road networks, canals, and settlement grids stretching for hundreds of miles. These were not isolated villages. They were interconnected systems. In parts of modern Brazil and Bolivia, ancient people reshaped entire regions. They constructed raised fields to manage flooding, artificial ponds for fish farming, and straight roads aligned with cardinal directions. Some settlements were arranged in precise geometric patterns, suggesting advanced planning and centralized coordination. One of the most revealing discoveries was terra preta, or dark earth. Unlike the nutrient-poor soils typical of the Amazon, terra preta is rich, fertile, and human-made. It was created through the deliberate mixing of charcoal, organic waste, and pottery fragments over generations. These soils remain fertile even today, thousands of years later. This means ancient Amazonian civilizations were not merely surviving in the jungle, they were improving it. Estimates now suggest that millions of people may have lived in the Amazon before European contact. When disease arrived in the 16th century, populations collapsed so rapidly that forests reclaimed farmland within decades, erasing visible traces of civilization and creating the illusion of untouched wilderness. This pattern repeats across South America. Civilizations did not vanish because they failed to adapt. They vanished because their populations were shattered by forces beyond their control. Climate shifts, environmental limits, and later, disease. The land healed over their absence, hiding the evidence. In the Andean region, this cycle of growth and disappearance occurred again and again. Each civilization learned from the last, refining agricultural terraces, water management systems, and social organization. Knowledge accumulated even as cities fell silent. This long continuity explains something often misunderstood about the Inca. The Inca did not conquer empty lands. They did not impose order on chaos. They integrated existing systems. Their empire expanded rapidly because it absorbed local knowledge rather than replacing it. In many regions, Inca administrators relied on pre-existing agricultural terraces, storage systems, and road networks. Their genius lay in standardization, not invention. Even the famous Inca quipu, knotted cords used for record-keeping, likely evolved from earlier accounting traditions. Memory in South America was tactile and visual rather than written, encoded in textiles, architecture, and landscape. Across the continent, textiles held symbolic power equal to writing elsewhere. Patterns conveyed identity, status, and belief. Some designs persisted for thousands of years, passing through multiple civilizations unchanged. Religion also followed long arcs of continuity. Deities transformed rather than disappeared. Sacred mountains, water sources, and celestial events remained central across cultures. Ritual adapted to new political forms, but retained ancient roots. What emerges from this deep history is not a sequence of isolated civilizations, but a web of ideas, practices, and adaptations stretching back thousands of years. The lost civilizations of South America were not experiments that failed. They were chapters in an ongoing process. Their cities fell, but their solutions endured. Their political systems vanished, but their environmental knowledge survived. Their names were forgotten, but their influence shaped everything that followed. This is why modern excavations continue to surprise even experienced archaeologists. Each discovery forces a reevaluation of what was possible without writing, metal, or centralized empires. South America was not behind the rest of the ancient world. It was different. Its civilizations developed along paths shaped by geography, climate, and ecology, producing solutions uniquely suited to their environments. In many cases, those solutions were more sustainable than later systems imposed from outside. The tragedy is not that these civilizations disappeared. It is that their achievements were erased from memory. But memory is returning. With every buried road revealed by LiDAR, with every mound uncovered beneath forest soil, with every ancient field rediscovered beneath modern farmland, the story becomes clearer. South America was home to some of the oldest, most adaptive, and most innovative civilizations on Earth. They were older than the Inca, older than many Old World empires, and they remind us that civilization does not follow a single path. It grows where humans learn to listen to the land, and it fades when that balance breaks. As evidence accumulated across South America, a striking realization emerged. These civilizations were not marginal or accidental. They were deliberate, long-term experiments in how humans could live within extreme environments without exhausting them, at least for a time. In the Andes, altitude was not an obstacle. It was a resource. Ancient societies learned how to farm above 3,500 meters, where oxygen is thin and temperatures swing violently between day and night. They domesticated crops like potatoes and quinoa that could survive frost, drought, and poor soils. Genetic diversity was preserved deliberately, ensuring resilience against crop failure. Storage became a science. Granaries were built in high, dry, windy locations to preserve food for years. This allowed populations to survive unpredictable seasons and made long-distance trade possible without immediate consumption. Surplus was not a sign of luxury. It was insurance. Across valleys and mountains, roads connected ecological zones rather than political borders. These routes allowed people to exchange what one environment lacked and another produced in abundance. Fish, maize, coca leaves, obsidian, feathers, and textiles moved across hundreds of miles, long before empires enforced integration. This networked thinking is crucial to understanding why South American civilizations lasted so long. They did not rely on a single resource, a single crop, or a single city. Diversity was built into the system. Even social organization reflected this principle. Many societies practiced forms of shared labor, communal land use, and reciprocal exchange. Authority existed, but it was often ritual or symbolic rather than absolute. Power was reinforced through belief, ceremony, and redistribution rather than constant coercion. This does not mean these societies were peaceful or idealized. Conflict existed, inequality existed, human ambition existed everywhere. But the systems they built were flexible enough to absorb pressure until pressure exceeded adaptation. When collapse came, it rarely arrived suddenly. A drought might last longer than expected. Floods might arrive more frequently. Forests might be cleared faster than they could regenerate. At first, adjustments worked. Then they worked less. Then they failed. And when they failed, people moved. This movement is often misinterpreted as disappearance. In reality, it was transformation. Entire populations shifted toward regions that could still support them. New cultures formed from fragments of old ones. Traditions merged. Knowledge flowed forward, even as cities were abandoned. This is why South America presents such a challenge to traditional historical narratives. There are few sharp endings, few clear beginnings. Instead, there is continuity through change. Even after European contact devastated populations through disease and violence, indigenous knowledge did not vanish entirely. Agricultural terraces continued to shape landscapes. Crops domesticated thousands of years earlier now feed the world. Environmental techniques once dismissed as primitive are being rediscovered as models of sustainability. The forgotten cities of South America were not failures. They were lessons. Lessons in adaptation, resilience, and limits. Their greatest achievement was not monumentality, but longevity. Some of these societies lasted longer than most modern states have existed. They endured because they understood something fundamental. Civilization is not about dominating nature, but negotiating with it. When negotiation failed, they did not cling blindly to broken systems. They let them go. This willingness to abandon, to relocate, to reimagine life elsewhere is what allowed South American civilizations to persist across millennia, even as individual cities vanished. The tragedy is not that these cities disappeared. It is that modern history mistook disappearance for absence. Under forests, beneath deserts, along riverbanks and mountain ridges, the evidence remains. Roads that lead nowhere, fields reclaimed by jungle, stones shaped by hands long forgotten. Each discovery rewrites what we thought we knew about the ancient world, and each one forces a deeper question. If civilizations can rise, thrive, and vanish so completely that even their existence is forgotten, what does that say about permanence? The cities older than the Inca were not anomalies. They were the norm. Civilization in South America was not a single empire rising from nothing. It was a long conversation between people and land, spoken over thousands of years, in many voices, most of which were silenced by time. But the land still listens, and slowly it is answering back. As the layers of South America's ancient past continue to unfold, another realization becomes unavoidable. These civilizations were not isolated experiments. They were part of a continental-scale system of human adaptation that functioned for thousands of years. Across deserts, rainforests, mountains, and coastlines, people engineered solutions that allowed life to flourish in some of the most extreme environments on Earth. Where rainfall was scarce, they captured it. Where soils were poor, they transformed them. Where altitude challenged survival, they redesigned agriculture itself. In the high Andes, farmers created vertical agricultural systems, cultivating different crops at different elevations. Maize thrived in warmer valleys, potatoes in cold uplands, quinoa in thin mountain air. This vertical integration allowed communities to spread risk across multiple ecological zones. If drought struck one region, others could compensate. Storage systems were equally sophisticated. Inca and pre-Inca societies built thousands of stone granaries, positioned along windy ridges to preserve food through natural refrigeration and ventilation. Some could store surplus for years, buffering entire regions against famine. These systems were not accidental. They were the product of accumulated knowledge refined over countless generations. Even more remarkable was how ancient South Americans managed water. In coastal deserts where rainfall was almost non-existent, people built underground aqueduct networks that tapped into mountain-fed aquifers. These systems distributed water evenly, preventing salinization and erosion. Some of these channels still supply modern villages. In flood-prone Amazonian regions, raised fields lifted crops above seasonal waters while retaining moisture during dry months. Artificial wetlands supported fish populations. Forest management created mosaic ecosystems that increased biodiversity rather than reducing it. Far from destroying nature, these civilizations cultivated it. This deep environmental integration explains why many of these societies remained stable for centuries, even millennia. Their systems were resilient because they were diverse, redundant, and flexible. They were not optimized for maximum yield, but for long-term survival. Yet no system is immune to change. Over time, even the most balanced societies faced challenges that exceeded adaptation. Shifting climate patterns altered rainfall. Prolonged droughts disrupted agriculture. Flood cycles intensified. Volcanic events reshaped landscapes. And each disturbance forced populations to respond. When adaptation failed, people moved. Migration was not collapse, it was strategy. Populations flowed along river corridors, mountain passes, and coastal routes, carrying seeds, tools, beliefs, and traditions. New cultures emerged from old ones, blending inherited knowledge with new environmental realities. This constant movement explains why South America exhibits such cultural diversity. Languages, art styles, and technologies varied dramatically across short distances, reflecting centuries of experimentation and exchange. The Inca did not unify a fragmented continent. They consolidated a complex tapestry. Their empire functioned because it tapped into ancient logistical systems. Roads followed ancestral routes. Agricultural terraces expanded earlier designs. Religious rituals absorbed local deities rather than erasing them. Political authority was layered onto existing social networks. Even the famed Inca road system, stretching over 40,000 kilometers, followed corridors shaped by thousands of years of human movement. Messengers ran paths worn smooth by generations before them. This continuity reveals something profound. Civilization in South America was not about singular achievements. It was about persistence. Cities rose and fell. Cultures transformed, but human presence endured. The cities older than the Inca were not forgotten by the land. They were absorbed into it. Their stones became foundations. Their fields became forests. Their roads became footpaths. Modern development often erases what little remains. Highways cut through ancient settlements. Dams flood valleys once cultivated for centuries. Urban expansion buries mounds, terraces, and canals beneath concrete. And yet, every new archaeological discovery proves that much still lies hidden. Entire cities remain buried beneath jungle canopy. Road networks lie invisible beneath farmland. Ceremonial centers rest beneath suburban neighborhoods. Each excavation peels back another layer of a story that was never meant to vanish, only to sleep. What makes this history so powerful is not its mystery, but its scale. South America was not a peripheral stage of civilization. It was one of its oldest theaters. Here, humanity learned to adapt to extremes, to engineer ecosystems, and to sustain large populations without the tools considered essential elsewhere. The cities older than the Inca remind us that civilization is not defined by stone monuments or written language. It is defined by ingenuity, and ingenuity leaves traces even when memory fades. Slowly, carefully, science is uncovering those traces, and with each discovery, the ancient world becomes larger, richer, and more interconnected than we ever imagined. As archaeologists continue to reconstruct this deep past, one final misconception collapses completely. The idea that civilizations must look a certain way to be real. Stone cities, written records, metal tools, these are not prerequisites for complexity. They are merely one path among many. South America followed another path. Here, civilization expressed itself through landscapes rather than texts, through systems rather than monuments, through continuity rather than permanence. The absence of writing did not mean the absence of memory. Knowledge was stored in fields, in roads, in seasonal rhythms, and in ritual practice. Agricultural calendars encoded climate knowledge. Ceremonies aligned with celestial cycles. Architecture reflected cosmology. Memory lived in action, not in ink. This is why so much was misunderstood when Europeans arrived. They looked for stone cities and found forests. They looked for books and found oral tradition. They looked for centralized empires and saw dispersed communities. And they concluded that nothing significant had existed before. What they failed to see was scale without spectacle. In many regions, populations were spread deliberately across landscapes rather than concentrated into single urban centers. This distribution reduced vulnerability to drought, flood, and disease. It also made these societies harder to recognize centuries later. Cities were not always dense clusters of stone. Sometimes they were networks. Networks of fields, networks of roads, networks of villages bound by ritual, trade, and shared memory. From above, these systems are only now becoming visible. LiDAR scans reveal straight causeways stretching for kilometers through jungle. Circular and rectangular earthworks aligned with astronomical events. Settlement patterns repeating with mathematical precision across vast areas. These discoveries force a re-evaluation of what urban means. Urbanism does not require walls. It does not require towers. It requires coordination, and coordination existed here, at scale, for millennia. The cities older than the Inca were not frozen in time. They evolved continuously, responding to environmental pressure, demographic change, and social tension. When one configuration became unsustainable, another emerged. This fluidity is why collapse in South America rarely resembles the dramatic endings seen elsewhere. There are few moments of total failure. Instead, there is motion. People moved uphill when floods worsened. They shifted crops when temperatures changed. They reorganized belief systems when old explanations failed. Civilization here was not brittle. It was elastic. And elasticity is why it lasted so long. The Inca inherited this elasticity and applied it at imperial scale. Their success was built on flexibility, relocating populations, redistributing resources, and adapting local systems rather than erasing them. When that flexibility vanished under the pressure of conquest and disease, even the Inca system unraveled quickly. The lesson is consistent across time. Civilizations endure not by maximizing control, but by maximizing adaptability. The lost civilizations of South America are not cautionary tales of failure. They are demonstrations of resilience. Their disappearance from memory was not inevitable. It was a consequence of how history chose to define civilization, privileging stone over soil, text over practice, permanence over process. But archaeology is changing that narrative. Every new discovery pulls another thread from the old story, unraveling assumptions that shaped modern identity. The Americas were not late to civilization. They were early, differently early. They developed solutions the world is only beginning to appreciate. Sustainable agriculture, landscape-scale planning, ecological integration. Ideas that feel modern today were ancient here. And as climate instability returns to the modern world, these forgotten systems are being studied not as curiosities but as models. The past is not just being rediscovered, it is being consulted. The cities older than the Inca are no longer silent. They are speaking through soil chemistry, satellite imagery, and stone aligned with stars. They tell a story not of mystery, but of mastery, not of disappearance, but of transformation. And the deeper we listen, the clearer it becomes. Civilization does not need to look familiar to be advanced. It only needs to endure. As this deeper picture comes into focus, it becomes clear that South America was not merely home to early civilizations. It was a testing ground for alternative futures. Futures where growth did not always mean expansion, where power did not always require conquest, and where survival depended more on balance than domination. What modern archaeology reveals is not a forgotten golden age, but a long conversation between humans and some of the most demanding environments on Earth. Every river valley, every mountain slope, every forest clearing represents a decision made thousands of years ago. A decision about how to live, how to share resources, and how to prepare for uncertainty. In many regions, ancient communities intentionally limited their size. Villages rarely grew beyond what local ecosystems could sustain. When populations increased, new settlements were founded rather than expanding existing ones. This prevented overexploitation and reduced vulnerability to localized collapse. Social systems reflected this restraint. Hierarchies existed, but they were often temporary, ritual-based, or seasonal. Authority shifted with environmental cycles rather than remaining fixed. Leaders mediated between people and the land rather than ruling through permanent force. This fluid structure made South American civilizations harder to recognize through the lens of traditional history, but it also made them remarkably resilient. When droughts intensified, people shifted crops rather than fields. When floods became unpredictable, settlements moved rather than fortified. When belief systems failed to explain reality, rituals changed rather than hardened. Adaptation was cultural, not just technical. This adaptability is why the disappearance of cities does not mark the disappearance of people. Many communities survived by dissolving into smaller units, spreading across landscapes, and preserving knowledge and practice rather than architecture. From a modern perspective, this looks like decline. From a survival perspective, it was success. The land beneath South America carries this memory quietly. Terraces etched into mountainsides, soil enriched by ancient hands, causeways disappearing into jungle, patterns too deliberate to be accidental, too subtle to be immediately visible. Each rediscovered system forces a reevaluation of modern assumptions. We often equate civilization with density, speed, and growth. The ancient societies of South America suggest another model, one where endurance mattered more than accumulation. This model was not perfect. Environmental pressures still overwhelmed systems. Human ambition still caused imbalance. But the response was rarely total collapse. It was transformation, and transformation leaves fewer ruins. That is why so much of this history remained invisible for so long. The cities older than the Inca were not erased in a single moment. They faded as people adapted, as landscapes healed, and as memory shifted. By the time outsiders arrived, forests had reclaimed fields, rivers had changed course, and silence had replaced ceremony. What remained was a story incomplete. But science is learning to read silence. LiDAR cuts through canopy. Soil chemistry reveals ancient farming. Patterns emerge where none were believed to exist. Slowly, a continent-long civilization, not unified by empire, but by adaptation, is coming back into view. And with it comes a question that cannot be ignored. If civilizations can thrive for thousands of years without leaving monumental ruins, without writing, and without domination, what does that say about how we define progress? Perhaps the most advanced civilizations are not those that leave the largest monuments. Perhaps they are the ones that leave the lightest footprint. The lost civilizations of South America were not failures waiting to be replaced. They were alternatives. Alternatives to conquest. Alternatives to endless growth. Alternatives to the belief that permanence equals success. They remind us that civilization is not a destination. It is a relationship with land, climate, and time. And like all relationships, it must adapt or end. As this forgotten history slowly reemerges, it begins to unsettle one of the most deeply rooted assumptions of the modern world, that civilization must grow bigger, faster, and more visible in order to matter. The ancient societies of South America tell a quieter story, one where success was measured not by permanence, but by continuity. For thousands of years, people here lived with the expectation that landscapes would change, rivers would shift, Forests would reclaim fields. Rainfall would fail and return. Civilization was designed to move with these changes, not resist them indefinitely. This worldview shaped everything. Architecture favored materials that could return to the earth. Cities were planned with the assumption that they might one day be abandoned. Knowledge was carried in people, not locked in buildings. When a place could no longer sustain life, leaving was not failure. It was wisdom. This is why so many ancient South American cities feel unfinished to modern eyes. They were never meant to be eternal. They were meant to serve a moment in time. Contrast this with civilizations that sought permanence through stone and monument. When those systems failed, they left dramatic ruins, warnings frozen in place. In South America, the warning was different. It was subtle. It was encoded in flexibility. The people here accepted impermanence as part of life. That acceptance allowed societies to persist far longer than rigid systems elsewhere. Even when cities vanished, cultures endured. Even when names were forgotten, practices survived. Even when memory faded, the land itself retained the imprint of human intention. Today, scientists studying ancient South American agriculture are rediscovering techniques capable of addressing modern crises. Raised fields that prevent flooding. Soil systems that remain fertile for centuries. Polyculture farming that resists collapse when single crops fail. These are not relics. They are solutions. The lost civilizations of South America did not disappear because they were inferior. They disappeared because history favored what could be seen easily, not what worked quietly. Stone lasts longer than soil. Writing travels farther than practice. Empire leaves clearer records than balance. But the absence of records is not the absence of intelligence. What we are uncovering now is a civilization written into landscapes rather than texts. A civilization that thrived by understanding limits rather than ignoring them. The cities older than the Inca force us to confront an uncomfortable idea. Perhaps the most advanced civilizations are not those that dominate their environment. Perhaps they are the ones that learn when to step back. These societies understood something the modern world often forgets. Growth is only one phase of survival. Stability is another. Withdrawal is another still. Civilization is not a straight line. It is a cycle. And cycles demand humility. As more of this hidden history comes to light, the story of South America grows larger, not smaller. It is no longer a footnote before the Inca. It is a vast, ancient chapter of human ingenuity, one that challenges how we define success, progress, and endurance. The land beneath South America still holds countless stories waiting to be uncovered. Not because they were lost, but because they were allowed to rest. They waited for a time when humanity might finally be ready to listen. And now, slowly, we are. The cities older than the Inca are no longer silent. They are speaking, not of conquest or collapse, but of adaptation, balance, and the quiet intelligence required to survive deep time. And in a world once again facing uncertainty, their voice feels less like history and more like instruction. In the end, the lost civilizations of South America do not leave us with ruins that demand awe. They leave us with questions that demand humility. For thousands of years, people here built societies that did not seek permanence. They did not carve their legacy into stone for eternity. They shaped land, water, and ecosystems in ways meant to serve life, and then returned quietly to the earth when the balance shifted. Their cities vanished not because they failed, but because they were never designed to last forever. That is what makes them difficult for us to understand. Modern civilization measures success by visibility, by size, by survival through time. But these ancient societies measured success differently, by continuity, adaptability, and restraint. When environments changed, they changed with them. When systems broke, they let them go. They chose survival over legacy. History forgot them because they did not leave behind what history prefers to remember. No empires frozen in stone. No texts declaring dominance. No monuments insisting on permanence. But the land remembers. It remembers in terraces that still shape mountainsides, in soils enriched by human hands thousands of years ago, in roads that guided movement long before borders existed. And now, slowly, science is learning how to listen. The cities older than the Inca remind us that civilization does not follow a single path. That progress is not always upward. That endurance sometimes requires stepping back rather than pushing forward. They remind us that humanity has solved the problem of survival many times before, not by conquering nature, but by understanding it. And as the modern world faces uncertainty once again, these forgotten civilizations feel less like ancient history and more like a message written into landscapes rather than words, a message that says civilization does not need to be loud to be advanced. That balance can be more powerful than expansion. The cities older than the Inca were not lost. They were waiting for a time when humanity might finally ask the right question. Not how to build something that lasts forever, but how to live well, long enough, and wisely enough to let go when the time comes.